Hi, I'm Shannon McKinnon, host and media producer at Cybercrime Radio. Welcome to Let's Talk SOC, a cybercrime magazine podcast series brought to you by Secureworks, a leader in cybersecurity, empowering security and IT teams worldwide to accelerate effective security operations. Joining me today is Jeff McLain, Senior Cloud Security Consultant for the Incident Response Practice at Secureworks. We're talking about why securing the cloud is a gray line. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.
Jeff, what are the differences when it comes to cloud and infrastructure as a service and SaaS applications?
Well, cloud as a service and things like infrastructure, SaaS, platform as a service, they're all very different things, but they're all kind of all sides of the same coin. So talking about cloud as a service, this is really kind of the umbrella term that it kind of encompasses all the SaaS, called PaaS and infrastructure as a service models. So those services really are not mutually exclusive. Many of the organizations that I work with use all three. Some use combinations depending on their needs. But cloud as a service is really what we kind of talk about that just kind of encompasses all of it. And usually we're talking about the public cloud. Public cloud encompasses your big three, we call them, the AWS, the Azure, and Google. And these are really just kind of referred to as a way to modernizing your organization's IT capabilities by adopting these cloud services to kind of either supplement or enhance your on-premise IT offerings. So the cloud service really is at the core of the cloud, and it's really the main chief advantage of using the as-a-service solution, as they say, is really the economics of it. It's how customers can access and really scale their IT capabilities to really kind of meet more predictable cost without all the expenditures and overhead of purchasing and maintaining, data centers and having servers and that kind of thing that are over-provisioned and underutilized based on, you try to future-proof when you're spending that kind of money on hardware to kind of account for those unforeseen increases that you may see later. You have a lot of wasted utilization in your IT infrastructure. So that's why a lot of organizations do go to the cloud as a service model. It also has great security advantages, and we'll kind of talk about the security aspect of it probably in a little bit. But also gives them resilience. It gives them huge competitive advantages over their competitions because of the speed you can roll out this infrastructure. So that's great predictability, and it's all API based, so it's all code on the back end, which gives your cloud a really nice mix of being able to mix with third-party tools and services and kind of all your ins and outs. So that's really what cloud as a service really encompasses.
As you start connecting into a cloud infrastructure, especially in a multi-cloud fashion, who is responsible for monitoring and securing?
Well, this is really kind of where that kind of gray area of security in the cloud really gets muddied, at least for people and organizations that are first kind of diving into these cloud technologies, and why all the cloud providers, no matter who it is, has what they call a shared responsibility model. And this clearly lays out exactly who's responsible for what. And each of these models does kind of vary slightly from provider to provider, but the general theme is that the provider is responsible for the security of the cloud. That's a big emphasis on the of. And you are responsible for security in the cloud. And what that really means is that the provider is responsible for like the data centers, the hardware, the physical networks, the fire suppression, all the stuff that you don't see or can control in the cloud. So that means that you're responsible for everything else, things like hardening your workloads and applications, virtual machines, databases, all this stuff is secure much like you would do with your on-premise in kind of a traditional IT infrastructure. So if you're unsure who is responsible for what, just search for shared responsibility model for your given provider. So, take a look at like AWS. They're going to be responsible for the software that is around their compute, their storage, their databases, networking. That's the software that runs those services, not things like Windows or Linux. And they're also responsible for the hardware of their regions and availability zones, which are kind of like sub data centers. We're leaving everything else to the consumer. So all the customer data, their applications, the operating systems, hardening those windows and those servers just like you normally would, firewall, all that kind of stuff is responsible by the consumer. Once you actually start kind of looking at what is highly defined in these models, you really start to understand what they're responsible, what you're responsible for. It's kind of a team effort between you and the provider, and they're there to help you and do what they can to provide a secure environment for you.
And what common pitfalls do you see organizations are really struggling with when securing their cloud environments?
So kind of the biggest pitfalls that at least I've encountered over the years is just these organizations where they kind of just jump into the cloud, mostly because they've been promised a lot of things about, efficiencies and cost and things like that. And they don't really understand the basics. And we talk about these frameworks and models that they're getting into, things like there's a well-architected framework that all the providers kind of lay out that says, here's how you really need to build your cloud. There's a cloud adoption framework that's really good for people that are just kind of getting into the cloud world, if you will. Again, we talked about shared responsibility. All this stuff is what the organization needs to understand before really getting into it, because that's where all these security principles that we've all worked with for our entire careers apply just the same. But when you combine that with the shared responsibility model and understand your kind of part in that, you really have to just understand the basics, because if you don't, then assumptions start getting made, and when you assume, what happens? So also really just implementing the same type of network security, encryption, identity management, governance, that kind of thing to control your environment still goes a long way in the cloud, quote unquote, much the same way as it does like on premise. So, the cloud providers really do give you a lot of tools to manage your security, manage your accounts, manage your workloads, things from visibility, monitoring, logging, alerting, all this stuff from a security perspective. I'm more an AWS guy, so things like Security Hub that alerts you on things that may be wrong with your account or with what's going on in your account, the workloads. Guard Duty is a suite of tools that alerts you on crypto mining and ransomware, things like that. So it just really allows you to get in a position to have a good security posture in the cloud. And the other thing that I see as a major pitfall is organizations that don't use the principle of least privilege. So because of their lack of kind of overall knowledge of the cloud platform, they tend to make resources and users way too permissive just to make things work. They don't want to put too many restrictions, and then you have to troubleshoot for hours why a certain application isn't working or whatever. So that's always a tough one starting out, especially when you're dealing with users and kind of role-based controls. Give too high permissions, which, as just greatly increases the attack surface and kind of the risk to an organization, because humans, as we know, are usually the first to get compromised and usually the easiest to get compromised. So that's really kind of the few areas I see that lead to much bigger issues that can cause an enterprise to have a bad day, which is usually when people like me and Secureworks get a call and we happily go to work.
That's great, Jeff. Is there anything else that you want to add?
We talked about the shared responsibility model and trusting them to do their part and kind of trust yourself to do your part. So the relationship between the customer and the cloud provider is really kind of a funny kind of thing, because a trust relationship, it kind of doesn't matter whether you trust them or not, because you don't have any control, or say of what they're doing to secure their environments. But obviously if you're using them, then you have to have some sort of trust, right? So you got to think about the cloud providers under a crazy amount of just regulations and compliance things from all over the world that they have to meet. And obviously for legal reasons, the securing of the quote unquote of the cloud side, my experience is you can't trust them. They have some of the best security architectures and minds in the world, I think. Again, because if they screw up their part of it, then that can cost billions. So they really are on top of it. But certainly don't take my word or their word for it. You actually can request certain audit and regulatory type logs and things through support channels with that vendor. So if you're really kind of unsure about it, you actually can reach out to them and they will show you how compliant they are. So that should give you some peace of mind as well.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Jeff.
Well, thank you for having me.